This review is brought to you in part by Rogers Hobby Center in Saginaw, Minnesota, where we're proud to bring you the best scale model kit reviews on the planet. This review covers the Kenworth W900 Aerodyne tractor. It's a 125 scale kit from Revell, number 85-1507. It was re-released in 2009, and this vintage kit is still available at online outlets and auction sites. Sometimes called the Cadillac of trucks, the Kenworth W900 was built by PACCAR and set the standard for long-haul performance for quite a while. Now, this kit was once again initially released back in '96, and there are even reboxes from the original AMT models, which go back to 1980. So it's been a popular model for a long time. This one's indicated as a skill level 4 kit, but I think that's mostly because of the large decals and quite a significant number of parts. It's really a fairly basic kit, goes together very well, and doesn't have any real fit issues to speak of. Now, there has been some level of detail sacrificed due to making it easy to assemble, and I think you'll find that when you're done, however, this is a great looking kit, and it'll look great for you too if you just give it a little extra time and detail some special pieces so that they stand out and look better. Here are the contents of the kit. This is my version of the open box review. I opened the box and there they were, all the parts. But we'll show you how to put them together. Now we're going to use mostly liquid cement, sometimes super glue, occasionally white or clear glue for windows. And you'll find that you'll need to heed any of the manufacturer's safety suggestions when you use any of the products that you see or hear mentioned in the review. Here are the decals for the kit. The register is good and the colors are nice too. Now the long stripes, etc., really could use some setting solution, although the decals are pretty thin, which also allows the dark color to show through those white stripes. So pay attention to that and use some setting solution, as I mentioned, and plenty of warm water to place them until they're in position, and then give them the treatment so that they conform to the body of the model. We'll start construction with the wheel assemblies, and here are the tires, so go ahead and grab those and clean those up with some sandpaper and rough up the tread a little bit. Now the outer wheels, they have some pretty sizable sprue marks, so you may want to either clean them up and strip them and re-chrome them, or then go ahead and touch those up with a chrome pen. But we'll be using those. They're pretty nice looking. And then we're going to find all the inner wheels, and we're going to spray those with a flat black so that those go on the inside. And the outer wheels you see here, those are the components that we'll be using for the construction of the tires and wheels. They're pretty simple affairs, inner and outer wheels and the tires that they sandwich. Now remember to always remove any plating or paint so that you get a good bond with the glue. Also, I put a little black wash on here. That's a 50-50 mix of thinner and paint to bring out the details on those wheels. Of course, the tires are hard plastic, and the rear wheels are doubled, and they're a little bit difficult to put together, but just make sure that you press firmly the pins into the alignment holes and they fit with a click. Now we're going to grab these parts for the rear suspension drive unit, and here some detail is pretty simplified, but it comes out very sturdy for the build. So in a matter of minutes, the rubber shock dumpers, the transmission axle and the transaxles were all put into place, and they all fit here very tightly. There's hardly any glue needed. However, I did use a little thin liquid cement to make sure that they all stay together. Now we can go ahead and put the front suspension together with these two pieces, the spindle and the axle there, plus the crossover. Now, and we'll be putting those two pieces together, and I just used some tube glue here to make sure that they fit, set, and so that I can align them properly. So go ahead and, as you see here, place the front suspension into position, and with the front and the rear suspension in place now, we can go ahead and give that a nice coat of semi-gloss paint. And once the frame is dry, we can add the wheels to the base, and then we have a rolling chassis that's ready for the rest of the vehicle build. With the glue still drying on the dualies in back, I taped the wheels together with some Tamiya tape to try and make them have a little bit better alignment. This was probably the biggest letdown in the kit, was the tires and wheels. With the big sprue marks, and the hard plastic tires had a little bit of warp to them, but overall that was just about the only downside to the entire build. So grab these parts out of the kit, fenders and the fifth wheel there. Go ahead and spray those with the semi-gloss black and add those to the back of the cab as you see here. And you can see here we can add the decals to the back of the flaps, and also we're going to install those backup lights and tail lights to the back of the tractor. Just use a little bit of clear red to highlight the outer lenses there. Gather up these parts for the engine assembly next, and we're going to assemble the two halves of the engine block there, and then we're going to paint the other pieces separately. So go ahead and get that started. Once I had the block halves assembled, I noticed that the lines there where they go together left quite a bit of proud area, so I wanted to clean those up. So I started with a little Tamiya primer surfacer, and then you apply that, and then you go ahead and you start scraping and sanding until you start getting closer to a nice smooth finish. And then for primer, I've used a number of different types, and I find this to work pretty good for smaller parts like that. Once the seam was cleaned up, I went ahead and used a little bit of the Mr. Finishing surfacer and an airbrush to spray those pieces to preserve the details. I then, once the primer was done, I used a little Caterpillar yellow for the power plant, and this is true color paint. It's a high gloss school bus yellow. So these are from a new breed of acrylic lacquers, and they're pretty nice. They fit well, and they paint just as well as the oils. And here, once the yellow was dried, I detailed some of the pieces. As you can see, the starter is flat black, and there's some aluminum in some of the detail pieces here. And then here's the right side of the engine with the oil filter in place, and the fan belt there up front, and the hoses as well. They're flat black. So go ahead and use this for your guide. And now here's something I would have noticed earlier. The turbo unit has quite a seam, a parting line on it there that I didn't notice until after paint. So I went ahead and cleaned that up with some sand sticks and repainted that area. Now, in order to get the color a little closer to actual Caterpillar yellow, I used a little thin oil color paint, a little like an artist paint, and I thinned it very much in order to basically get a dirty wash. It also brings out the highlights and detail of the motor. So now you see that the motor is basically complete, and here's some of the detailing at different angles so that you can get a good idea of how you want to build your model, and this is how I did mine. I have to say it's pretty impressive for a fairly simple number of pieces. So Revell did a nice job of making a pretty detailed looking item here with very few number of parts. Now we can go ahead and assemble the two pieces of the radiator and the shroud fan unit there. Those can just be glued together, and then we're going to spray that with some gloss black, and also I added a little bit of color to kind of spruce up the unit, but maybe got a little crazy, and nonetheless you can hardly see it. Now the alignment pins are made to simulate some bolts there, so I went ahead and added a little detail to those as well. Along with the intake here and the turbo pipes, I primed those with some gloss black and used some polished aluminum paint to finish those off, and then some Tamiya smoke to give it a tint for heat staining, and I think that the metallic look of it pretty much approximates what they would look like in a real vehicle. And so let's move on to the body of the cab. And it's important to test fit, to mock up your parts to make sure that they all fit together. And when I was doing that, I noticed that the cab head and hood both had prominent mold lines on them. So I used a Sharpie to show them up. And also it helps when you're sanding those off, because when the line's gone, well, then so is the seam. So after I had removed the lines, I sanded all the surfaces with some progressive grades of paper, and then until the whole cab and the hood were smooth and ready to receive the primer. I had decided to darken the red to a ruby color shade to use a dark primer on the body, so I went ahead and sprayed that with some black primer, and then applied the same treatment to the hood. And it gives a pretty smooth finish, but you should still use 1000 grit or so to scuff it out and sand it off a little bit to make sure there are no imperfections in the primer. I let the primer dry overnight, and when it was ready, I sprayed the unit with some gloss black paint, a couple of medium coats. Okay, with the black dried, it was time to put on a couple of mist coats of my final color, and this was actually a called a True Color Apple Candy Red, which is not really a candy color. There's no translucence, it's just the color of a candied apple. It has some metallic flake in it, so it's pretty nice. And then after a couple of mist coats, then a couple of wet coats, and then let it set and dry. And it's pretty smooth paint, so it goes on very well and covers well too. After the paint was thoroughly dried, it was time to apply the decals, and some of these large stripes, of course, are sometimes finicky, but these came off very well and applied right into place using some warm water. One coat of aftermarket setting solution, and they conform perfectly to the body. The day after that, just hit the whole thing with a clear coat and bring out the shine. So now we'll take a look at the glass, and one unfortunate thing is that the wipers are molded right into the glass, which can be detailed, but it would be better if they'd left them off, of course. But that's one of the beauties of this kit. They did cut some corners, but the price is beautiful. You can get this kit for $20 to $30 nowadays. So anyway, go ahead and install those with some white glue or crystal clear and put those in the cab. You see here the mock-up of the parts for the interior. Your wheel, the dashboard, the shifter, seats, and the bed there. And it's fairly simplified, but we'll get this ready for primer, clean it up, remove any sprue points, attachments, or ejector pin marks, and get ready to have some fun. So give the parts a nice mist, and then a couple of even coats of primer gray, and set those aside to dry. For the interior, I wanted to go with kind of a camel gray or a brown, and I couldn't find an exact shade, so I mixed my own. It's mostly white with a touch of orange, red, and green, and you can mix up yours to your liking just as well. Tip, now sometimes when you're brushing or spraying inside of an interior like this, you'll pick up some kind of grit. Some of the air comes back down and settles, so just brush it out after it's dry, and it cleans up real nice that way. With the main interior color painted, I used some Tamiya tape there at the base around the sidewalls, and tape that off because I'm going to paint the floor black, actually a gloss black. And then you want nice straight edges, so I tape it off to make sure. Now, after the floor was painted and the masking tape removed, I went ahead and picked out some detail with the silver. Some features have become visible here only about now. Finely engraved KW on the pedal here, you can see. I decided to paint the sleeper a red tone to kind of match the features of the exterior. And so I used some tape there to tape things off, protect areas not to be sprayed. And then I went for a high gloss torch red, and once more it's it's not really a high gloss. At best it'd be called a satin, but no complaint there because I was kind of looking for that anyway. I painted the sheet and the pillow with some off-white, and then detailed the pillow depressions with some shades of gray there to add a little touch to it. And then I used some checkerboard pattern BLD decals, and I used that to add a little bit of a flare to the bedspread there. Well, the bedspread turned out surprisingly well, so I decided to go ahead and add another one of the BLD. That stands for Blacklight Design. They're a carbon fiber look-alike decal that you can place on, and they look pretty nice, so I used them on the seat as well. And this particular set, this one is called Checkerboard Pattern version 0.01, and it makes for a nice looking fabric decal as well. We can turn to the dashboard now, and I of course painted that with the gray primer and the beige paint that I had mixed up earlier. Now the dashboard is just a marvel of engraving. Unfortunately, they did not supply a decal for the gauges. So the fine engraving is something that you can work with a lot of patience. Of course, I used some thinned paint for the background of the gauge dials, and I painted all of the knobs silver, and then some of them I highlighted with color, as you can see. But then I used the capillary action of some of the panel liners to try and outline the gauge dials, etc. We also painted the steering wheel alclad, and then the black parts were brushed on with some gloss and semi-gloss black paint. And now here's an overview of the completed dashboard with the steering column in place that's dry fitted to the interior. And now, of course, it's not nearly as devoid as it was before we started. So just adding a few details and a splash of color here and there can really spruce up your model kit, even for one as basic as this. So after dry fitting, you can go ahead and add all of the pieces into place with some adhesive, and add a few miniature magazines there to complete the interior of the cab. Now we can get out some of the chrome pieces, and that's where you have a decision to make. You either live with them because the parting lines are there and you can't get away from it. There's also some discoloration like you see in this slide, and some ejector pin marks under them right at the edges. So you either work with that, or you decide, like I did, to strip the chrome, fix the issues, and then repaint or replate them with alclad. And so here are the parts for the stacks and the tanks. They've been stripped of chrome by putting them in a bleach bath, and the chrome is thin, so it only takes a few seconds. But then I used some tape to help prevent sanding off details that I wanted to remain. And now with the primer dry and the tape on, I put some Tamiya putty on the seams, and I started to work on the unit, but I ran into a problem. Here's a tip. The clear gloss that goes underneath plating is somewhat resistant to Tamiya thin cement. So it's on the edges where you need to sand, actually sand those clean, or you can strip your chrome in something like Easy Off, the yellow can. Be careful, don't breathe it and don't touch it, but it will take that coating off. So it was back to the drawing board. So you can see I opened up the seam a little bit here, and then I applied some gel super glue to use as a filler and a sealant, but it dries very hard, and it takes quite a few tools, as you can see here, to go ahead and remove that for finishing. Just so you know where we're headed, this is a look at the finished tank, and this is our objective, is to make the tank look like this. So here you see the air filter cans, and it's a little easier to work with these. Well cleaned parts, will glue together pretty nicely, and since we're already aware of the issue with the clear gloss coating, we removed that and made sure that that didn't happen this time. Now with the assemblies all sanded smooth, the primer didn't reveal any major imperfections. And the next step, of course, is to base coat the units with some gloss black before spraying with alclad. You can see the parts posted here that are going to need to either be sprayed with the alclad chrome or just a silver, a bright silver, some of the smaller pieces. The orange line there indicates the mold line, which is around these air tanks, and it's easy to remove. You just use a hobby knife and scrape them off and then sand them smooth with some fine sandpaper. To add a little accent, I decided to paint these air tanks blue, and this is the TCP brand Candy Cobalt Blue. I thought it was a real nice look, so we're going to include those in the build. The exhaust stacks were prepped in the same way. You just file off the seams. Sometimes you need some putty, but usually not. And then, of course, a quick prime and some alclad over a black base, and they're looking really nice. The battery cases and steps here were easy to prep, same way. They just didn't have too much to deal with as far as parting lines go. And then a final coat of paint, and they looked really nice. Again, remind you to scrape any paint or plating off to glue these parts together, and you can see the steps installed here. And now we can go ahead and install all these parts that we've been working on. Make sure that you put the air tanks and the fuel tanks into place, and look for symmetry on those parts to make sure they all look even around the vehicle. So I decided, after seeing all the parts re-plated with the alclad over a black base, that they looked much better than the original chrome parts. So I took these remaining chrome pieces, stripped them off, and we're going to plate those with our alclad coating as well. With those accessory external pieces dried, it's time to install those, and those go on your build last because they're the easiest to break off when you're handling the model for installation and construction. Now on the hood, we're going to add the pieces to the front end there. The grill gets a black wash in the mesh area of the grill, as a radiator, and that of course is just 50-50 thinner and paint. And just let that seep into those recesses. Also add the headlight bezels and use some white or clear glue to install the headlights lenses into the bezels. So with all the accessory pieces added, this is turning out to be a pretty colorful underside for a big rig. Now, obviously there's not a lot of extra detail there, but hey, if you want to, go crazy, add brake lines, etc., and detail it as much as you like. Now we notice with the hood mounted on the hinges there that it actually touches the cans there in the back, the air cans, and so if you want to prevent that, you'll have to move those air cans back a little bit and give that a little bit more clearance. That's about the only fit issue that I found in the kit, so keep that in mind when you're building. Now, you can still close the hood, but they will touch a little bit on the way through, and eventually probably scrape some paint. Well, there you have it. Your model is complete, and if you tilt the hood on this one, she can still look pretty good, even for a low price point model with most of the details molded in. So here's the right side profile. Still an impressive looking kit, and on the 3/4 view here, notice the headlights there. I used a Sharpie, and I put some gaskets around the outside of the headlight lenses there to simulate that, and that looks pretty nice. Here's a driver's side view, and if you saw somebody in a vehicle like this going down the road, you would know they're getting some work done. Now on the back end here, we've got a view of the fifth wheel and the double axles there. The wheels, however, tires, they just would not do a good job of alignment. You might want to consider aftermarket tires if you're serious about this particular model. You can take a look at the rear end here, and the brake lights and the rear driving lights were painted chrome. Then some clear red was added for the brakes, and finally a drop of clear varnish added on top to simulate some glass and give it a clear plastic appearance. Now the front view of the truck here is all squared out, and she's looking really good. If I were you, I would buy one and put it on my shelf. Well, we hope you like this premium step-by-step scale model kit review, and so that you don't miss any more, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can just click on the icon there in the lower right hand corner, or find us on Facebook or at our website rightonreplicas.com. Thanks!